Good morning, everyone. We are very happy to see you joining us for the webinar, Building Peaceful, Resilient Communities, an Essential Part of Sustainable Development. It is the very first webinar in the series, Fostering Peaceful and Resilient Communities through Museums and Libraries. It is part of a long ongoing project, Localizing Sustainable Development Goals through Museums and Libraries, supported by the UNESCO Participation Programme. My name is Inga Sorgunte. I'm representing the Latvian Museum Association. And before I'm giving the floor to our lecturer of today's webinar, Henry McGhie, I would like to share a small presentation presenting the project and this ongoing partnership to show you where we are coming from. I will share my screen. And share a little bit of history behind this series of webinars. So the whole project is called Localizing SDGs through Museums and Libraries. It started in 2020 when the Latvian Museum Association approached Latvian National Commission for UNESCO to work with the SDGs together. We had just discovered these 17 goals and we were very keen to do something essential and meaningful with them, and basically start by introducing and educating our colleagues about sustainable development. Why UNESCO? Because UNESCO's mission is to contribute to the building of a culture of peace, the eradication of poverty, sustainable development, and intercultural dialogue through the fields of competence of UNESCO, which is education, sciences, culture, communication, and information. And maybe you have noticed the largest cultural policy conference organized by UNESCO, and the one that took place in 2022 highlighted fields where culture can make difference in sustainable development. And the keywords here are peace and stability, human-centered and context-specific development, force for resilience, social inclusion, and so on. And we do see museums in these topics. And this year, 2025, there will be another Mondial Conference, and we hope that the role of museums and libraries will be highlighted again in the context of sustainable development. So when we started our collaboration in the Baltic scale, we first organized our conference Localizing SDGs through Museums and Libraries in 2021. And it united Baltic museums and libraries, and our slogan was "Ask your library, ask your museum." And with this slogan, we wanted to position museums and libraries in the role of experts, reliable specialists that can consult and support local communities in their interest and challenges within sustainable development. We organized an online conference. We published articles by our colleagues in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and we published a conclusions document that highlighted the main conclusions that participants agreed on. The online conference in 2021 was actually the first experience of this type of event for us all. We worked in a studio at the National Library. It was the COVID time, if you can remember. And the social part, the interactive part, was held on a 3D online platform. We were really keen to meet and to discuss, but those were the only opportunities to do that in this year. So those were case studies from Lithuanian, Estonian, and Latvian museums and libraries, showcasing different approaches, how our colleagues were working with sustainable development. And basically, those were first attempts to work with these issues. And we were very moved and thrilled to meet and to discuss and to see the different kind of approaches in the Baltics. And what was clear and what was highlighted in the conclusion document was that this kind of networking was very important. We felt like our initiatives were very fragmented and fragile in a way, and we agreed to continue. So the second conference on localizing SDGs through museums and libraries luckily took place in person in Riga and online. And the big change was that the partnership was joined by colleagues from Moldova and Georgia. So Latvian Museum Association visited the partnership associations in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Georgia, and Moldova to see what are the most successful approaches in working with the SDGs. Then the conference was organized, and again, a document of conclusions published. Those are some insights, some pictures from our visits that were really very beautiful encounters in all of the partnership countries. And those are the speakers of the conference at the Latvian National Museum of Arts in September 2023. In this time, we had sections on environmental sustainability, social sustainability, economic sustainability. We were trying to be more strategic and see how we had developed our skills in working with the SDGs and in which ways we're already contributing quite consciously to the different layers and dimensions of sustainability. And together with Henry McGhie, we worked on a guide. Henry, of course, is the author of the guide, Localizing the SDGs through Museums and Libraries, and partners contributed with case studies that are supporting this methodology and this guide. And this series that we are starting now, the series of webinars, are very much based on this guide. And this year we moved in the third phase of the project and organized the third conference. And this time it took place in Lviv in Ukraine, because it was a common decision of all the partners in 2023 that we feel this common challenge with the war in Ukraine, and we want to join our forces and talk about peace building through museums and libraries. And that was the main theme of this third conference. Those are the participants in Lviv. We were hosted by the Lviv Culture Center, which is a UNESCO and Lviv municipality project supported by government of Spain. It was really very moving and emotional experience being there and being together and talking about these very important topics and seeing the strength of museums and libraries in supporting peace. And those are the key messages from this last conference. You can read them also on the homepage of the Latvian Museum Association. And again, we agree that networking and working together is very, very important, and also showcasing, mapping, collecting, and making public the work that museums and libraries do for peace building is also very essential. So in this light, and as continuation of all these phases of this ongoing project, we are starting now the 4 webinars. The first one is today, and the following ones are on 30th September, 14th October, and 4th November. You can see the topics, and all of them are related to peace building through museums and libraries. And of course, we never forget the major slogan of SDGs, leave no one behind. And you can read it also from the sector's perspective. We would not like museums and libraries be excluded from the Agenda 2030. I will unshare my screen, and I would like to introduce the moderators of the series of our webinars. And we are very happy to have this opportunity to work with 2 great UK-based museum specialists. And the first one is Diana Walters. Diana works as a facilitator, researcher, prison chaplain, and activist for peace and social justice. She is based in UK, and Diana has over 35 years of experience in heritage and peace building. She has worked in over than 20 countries, including the former Yugoslavia, East Africa, Israel, Palestine, the former Soviet Union, and Southeast Asia. Good morning, Diana, and the floor is yours for a short introduction.
Good morning, Inga. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for guiding us through the context of this really timely and important series of seminars. And I just really hope that everybody will find something useful and practical and inspiring, because I think cultural organizations are doing so much amazing work, often hidden away and under the radar, to try and ensure that we can continue to have some kind of peaceful existence in what feels like a very turbulent world at the moment. So it's my great pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing lots of different views and perspectives and opinions.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to the webinars where you will be giving your lectures. But today's star is Henry McGhie. We've worked with Henry from 2020, from the very beginnings when the Latvian Museum Association started working with SDGs, and Henry has been our mentor and supporter and godfather, as we sometimes say. And Henry runs the museum consultancy Curating Tomorrow, working to empower museums and similar institutions to contribute to sustainable development agendas, including climate action, human rights, disaster risk reduction, biodiversity conservation, and peace building. Henry publishes an open access series of guides on these topics. Henry works internationally and is currently working on large-scale initiatives with ICOM and ICROM on these topics. Henry, the floor is now yours. Introduce yourself, and also, yeah, we're ready to hear your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Inga, and welcome everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak with you today. And just to say a word about how very grateful I am to have the opportunity to work with the Latvian Museums and Libraries Associations and their many partners over these years as we strengthen our awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals, about how we already contribute, about what we would want to do, and how we develop our skills, our confidence, and our practical abilities to connect and to contribute to this work. And so I'm going to share my screen and I'll give a PowerPoint. Okay, so my name is Henry McGhie. As Inga mentioned, I run a consultancy called Curating Tomorrow. And Curating Tomorrow is really based around three ideas: that the future does not just happen by accident, we make it. Secondly, that the museum-based skill of curating, of attention to detail, and selecting from the many things that we can do also has a part to play in this work. And the third part is that museums and similar institutions, libraries and other cultural institutions, they all have many roles that they can play. If they know how to play them, if they can play them well, and if we can make sure that we're working with communities and the future in mind. And I will speak very much about the Sustainable Development Goals, which I just put on the front slide here just because they look nice. So when we're talking about fostering peaceful and resilient communities through museums and libraries, I really love this because it's an active process. The work is never finished. And it's something that we can all contribute to and bring ourselves to, and to collaborate and to work together to create peaceful and resilient communities. And I'll just got some slides which some of them include photographs from Japan. I had a study trip to Japan a few years ago, and I'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. But Inga mentioned in the introduction that one of the things I work on is a approach called disaster risk reduction. And it sounds a bit almost scary, a bit heavy. It's the opposite. Disaster risk reduction is about building resilience. So what do we mean by resilience? the ability to absorb, to adapt, to transform in the face of change. And so I'd like to invite you in the start of this presentation to come with me to visit Resilient Town, which we see a picture of it in the guide. So you feel free to either close your eyes or just listen as I talk through this next few slides. So welcome to Resilient Town, a town that's exposed to various hazards, but at least it has plans in place to address these. So it faces the future with relative confidence. Resilient Town is made up of a number of different sectors, business, local government, as well as the communities and individuals who live there. They all understand and value the part that each and all of them have to play in the life of the town. Success is not measured only in economic terms, but is also about addressing the town's social and environmental challenges. I'll continue. People of all ages and backgrounds are aware of the town's plans, and they've contributed to their development. They are empowered through education, whether that's in school or through lifelong learning, to play a part in the town and to create the futures that they would want to see for themselves and other people. They're aware of where they have come from and where they are going to, drawing on their heritage. The town has changed over the years, but in ways that benefit everyone. Cultural and natural heritage are well understood, appreciated, and made accessible for all people. Heritage is continually renewed and refreshed, so it's not just about static things from the past. All of the town's institutions, including its cultural institutions, have developed their strength and their ability to fulfill their public responsibilities, supported by decision makers and policies. There is a strong community spirit and identity. Should there be a crisis, the town is confident its effects can be minimized, and there is a strong coordination across the town. People know what they have to do and who they can turn to for support. The town's long-term plans can help to steer recovery, and the strong relationships in place will help the town to recover rapidly. Resilient Town could be anywhere, and it could be, and it maybe already is, your town. And if it's not, what can be done to make it your town if you agree with some of the ideas? So when we're talking about these kind of activities, we're talking about a few different things kind of at the same time because they're very closely related. Peaceful communities, human rights, resilience, and sustainable development. They're not very separate things. They are really closely tied together, as we will see. So in this presentation, I'd like us to explore some of the concepts and the connections and to look at some current opportunities to take part in so that you have some practical guidance about things that you can concretely do in your work. So we have this thing called the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which people may be familiar with because it's a fairly colourful picture. But we should also understand that it doesn't come from nowhere. It's set out in this document called Transforming Our World, which was agreed by all the countries, all the governments in 2015, and it runs till 2030. So we just have a few years left. But whether we have a few years left or not, the framework is a really helpful one that I hope to explain to you in a bit more detail. And as Inga, our fantastic colleague, mentioned, we've really done quite a lot with this over the years. We started by kind of learning about the Sustainable Development Goals, what they are trying to do. We had conferences where people could reflect on what they're already doing and to connect it more concretely with the goals and targets. And then we've developed a kind of practical action plan that's set out in Localizing the SDGs. And lots of the resources that have come from these initiatives are openly available. You know, you can access them on YouTube, on the Latvian Museums Association's channel. You can see the webinars, you can see the conference presentations, and you can access the guide. So they're all there, ready to be used. And one of the very great successes, a high point, I would say, was when Latvia presented its report to the United Nations in 2022, and we had an online event kind of really showcasing what museums and libraries are doing as safe spaces for dialogue and information literacy. And you can see this on YouTube. It's been viewed about 32,000 times. Hopefully it'll get some more views because it continues to be very relevant to our world today. And we see our great colleague here, Lolita Tombon from the Jānis Lipke Memorial Museum in Riga. So what is it, this agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? We might be familiar with the picture on the right-hand side, but we have to understand it is only a picture, although it can be a very helpful one. So what does it say in the agenda? It is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity to strengthen universal peace, enlarge our freedom. It's an invitation to all sectors, all communities, and all people to take part in creating better futures. But very importantly, it only gives us the kind of template. It doesn't tell us exactly how to do it or exactly what success looks like. We need to work that out ourselves. We work out the detail and we work it out together. And so there is one agenda with 17 goals. 17 is far too many to remember. So how can we understand the agenda in a short way? So it takes the three traditional aspects of sustainability, social, environmental, and economic, and it turns them into missions of action. It turns them into things that we do, programs of action. So to end poverty and hunger in all their forms and to ensure dignity and equality. So I hope you can see it is a very active process to ensure prosperous, fulfilling lives in harmony with nature, to protect the planet's natural resources and climate for future generations, to foster peaceful, just and inclusive societies, which I'll say a bit more about, and to do all of this great work by working together. So the reason it's shown like a circle is because it can spin forever. And the reason it's shown like a jigsaw is because we need all of these bits. So they're not very separate, they're connected to one another. So when we look at the peace aspect, here is the peace mission in a bit more detail. We are determined to foster peaceful, just and inclusive societies, free of fear and violence. There can be no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. So what does this mean? It means that it's difficult to make progress if the world is is there a lot of conflict, a lot of tension. But it also means that sustainable development is a product of peace. You know, these things are very closely related. But when we think about peace, well, what do we mean? It surely has to be more than the absence of violence. Peace can also include the attitudes, the institutions, and the structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. And so the word peaceful in some ways is easier to work with because to me, it's easier to imagine. So if we think about a peaceful place, whether it's a village, a town, the countryside, what might it look like? It might be calm and quiet. It might be relaxing. It might be free of problems, enjoyable, tolerant, a place that is able to handle differences in constructive ways. So these are not definitions. These are just some ideas to help us get a little bit more focus, and we can have questions and answers at the end. So I just find that easier to imagine, but that's a personal view. So here we have the goals, 17 goals. We can see goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. We might think, okay, that's where peace sits, but peace is everywhere. You know, the 5 P's are spread across these goals. So let's just think about some particular goals, you know, so that we understand the picture in a bit more detail. So if we have goal 10, to reduce inequality within and among countries, to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, and to promote peaceful, inclusive societies for sustainable development. So these are 3 of the goals, 10, 11, and 16. But how can we do this? And thinking about museums and libraries, they're situated in particular places. We might think about doing it through education, quality education and lifelong learning, opportunities for all people. And this could be a great way for us to contribute to goal 11, making our cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, because if we don't do this work, we're getting in the way of goal 11. But what is this all about? Where does this come from, this picture of, 17 boxes? And so something I really always try to emphasize is that the Sustainable Development Goals do not come from nowhere. And they're not just about using natural resources carefully, which is how people often think of sustainability. The Sustainable Development Goals are about justice. They're about freedom, and they're about people, and they're about individuals, and they're about communities, and they're about all of us, and they're about humanity, and they're about the future, and many other wonderful things. So here we have a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the main contributors, with a really large version of the Declaration of Human Rights. So we have to understand that the Sustainable Development Goals are very much about human rights, as well as environmental goals. So what does this mean? Oops. Sorry, it's jumped a bit. Here we go. So the Sustainable Development Goals and human rights are very strongly connected. And so here's a nice passage from the United Nations, which I think explains this very well. That human rights matter because they embody the power of people standing up to change the world. Above all, this is what the 2030 Agenda needs to accelerate its course. When people can exercise their human rights, which just means if they can, use them, get access to them, they can stand up for themselves and for each other. They are empowered to shape the decisions that impact their lives. Human rights stand for equality, for participatory and inclusive societies that dismantle the structures of discrimination which drive poverty and inequality. When everyone can claim their human rights, no one can be left behind. Human rights are not only the right way, but the smart way to accelerate progress for more equitable and sustainable development, for a better future. And to take the words in a slightly different way, each Sustainable Development Goal is also a claim about human rights. Human rights are very closely related to these goals. And so this is a quote, which, sorry, many of you will have heard me say many times before if you've been to presentations. When we talk about human rights, of course, they can sound like very abstract, very high level, very unclear. And I absolutely love this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt from a famous speech that she gave called The Great Question. And in that speech, she said, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood that he or she lives in, the school or college that he or she attends, the factory farm or office where he or she works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equality and equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. And without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. So what does this mean? Well, to me, it means that human rights, of course, are very ambitious, very high level, but they have to be made practical. We have to bring them into our work, into our institutions, and into our lives. When we understand our own rights, we can begin to claim them. When we see injustice, we have to stand up to it. When we think about these different places where people can get their rights, the neighborhood, the school or the college, the factory or the farm, to me, that surely also has to be the museum or the library. These places can play particular roles in society. And so I'm just trying to make this connection that, as people would say, the Sustainable Development Goals, oh, they seem very far away, that's the work of governments. These are just in the same way as human rights are kind of practical tools, practical pieces of information that we can use. And so Inga mentioned before about this idea of the culture of peace. What is a culture of peace? Here's a short kind of idea of it from Belay. It's composed of a tolerance of differences, of dialogue, of equality, intercultural cooperation. It supports non-violence, sustainable development, and disarmament. So we see the same kind of words appear in many different places that we often don't really use in a practical way. And actually, we have a practical program of action for a culture of peace. It was put together by the UN in 1999. It has these 8 action areas, and let's just think of these in relation to museums and libraries. So if we can think that a culture of peace could be built through education, sustainable development, respect for human rights, promoting equality between men and women, democratic participation, not just in voting, but in decision-making in communities, promoting understanding, tolerance, and solidarity, helping information and knowledge flow freely in communities and society, and promoting peace and security. These could all help us to build this culture of peace. And as I look through that list of action areas there, I think, well, there are things that museums and libraries already do for many of these, but what else can they do? What could the goals be this year? What are the main opportunities? What would success look like? Who should we tell? Who should we involve? Who else can we bring into this great work? And we also have some attempts have been made to connect these high-level goals with the lives of individuals. So there was something called Manifesto 2000, quite a long time ago now, which was encouraging people to make a kind of pledge in their daily life, in their family and community, to do some of these things, to live by some of these principles, to respect other people, reject violence in all its forms, protect the underserved, take an active part in ending exclusion and injustice, defend freedom of expression, be a responsible consumer, respect nature and other people, and contribute to the development of the community. So it's about, involving people in the life of the community, about citizenship, taking part, looking out for one another, all wonderful things. So we already have some practical frameworks that we can use. Just as a few examples, we have something called the Mayors for Peace Network, which is a network of cities around the world. So many of you listening today are probably in cities that are members of the Mayors for Peace Network. Over 8,000 cities in 166 countries. It's a really great initiative. One of the things it does is to run a yearly art competition, Peaceful Towns. So it maybe some of you have already been in this. Again, to promote a culture of peace. I just mentioned this again to say that this idea of a culture of peace exists in many places. To cultivate peace consciousness, to be aware of peace, and to cause a culture of peace in which the actions of everyone are grounded in thinking about peace, to help it to take root in civil society as a foundation of lasting world peace. So if we do these things locally, the idea is that it helps to address wider tensions. And also just to say that the power of art and the power of culture and the power of children's voices and ideas is huge. And the more that we can kind of promote this and create opportunities for children and youth to share their visions of peace, what kind of future they would like for themselves and others, these can be fantastic. So let's go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Eleanor Roosevelt with the really big copy. I think she's holding a poster, but it does look like she's holding a huge copy of it. So even when we think about education in the Declaration of Human Rights, it's from the 1948, it's quite a long time ago now, but it talks about what the purpose of education is: to the full development of the human personality, to strengthen respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship. And these seem very basic things, but they're not always the basis of our education systems, which are often about preparing people for work or to go to further studies. So these very basic aspects of education sometimes get a bit forgotten, but we can really bring them into the work of museums and libraries. Many already do, but there is often a lot more that we can do too. And so, because the Declaration of Human Rights is a declaration, it's not legally binding on countries, but countries have made other agreements which are legally binding. There are also agreements, international agreements, which are not the law, but they do have a power. Countries have signed up to these things, but for a few different reasons, the country's agreements do not always make it into practical action in the cultural sector. So let's take an example. The UNESCO recommendation on education for peace and human rights is really old. It's from 1974. Probably many people have never heard of it, which is a shame. But there is a really great attempt now to bring this together with the Sustainable Development Goals, because countries that have signed on to this recommendation, they also have to report every 4 or 5 years just how they are doing. So this recommendation was revised in 2023, so it's agreed by all of the UNESCO member states. Many of you will be in UNESCO member states. It was changed a bit to become a recommendation on education for peace, human rights, and sustainable development, because we have to recognize that people and nature they do not live on separate planets. They are connected, and environmental destruction is a great threat to peace, just as conflict is a great threat to the environment. And so, although the recommendation itself is a bit long, it's really good. It's really useful. There is a shorter explainer about what the recommendation is, and definitions that we can use, the the aims of education, some practical aspects that we can use. So why not? Like why not have a look and see if you can contribute towards this. And within the Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 goals, of which one of them is quality education. But the thing to also know is that within each goal, there are more focused goals, sub-goals. These are called the targets. And one of them is target 4.7, to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge, motivation and skills to promote sustainable development. Promoting cultural diversity and tolerance, gender equality, human rights, peace and non-violence, climate change, environmental sustainability, human survival and well-being, and promoting sustainable consumption and production. So again, here is a list of 8 topics, pretty helpful. There are lots of resources that you can use, that you can access, whether it's like practical toolkits or webinars or networks, people who are working on these things already. So if you are already doing these things, fantastic. If you're interested in doing more, it's really easy to find information to help you. And so we can use the goals and targets to decide what it is we want to do, to focus what we're doing, to find tools and support, to work with other people, and we can also use them to tell our story. And this is a big challenge for the cultural sector, is it's not always so strong in telling its story. So if we can use these kind of practical tools, it really lifts up our work and it really shows the contribution of museums and libraries to sustainable development. So Education for Sustainable Development, ESD for short, it empowers learners of all ages to face and resolve local and global challenges, to take informed decisions and actions for the environment, to create a fair society for present and future generations, and to respect cultural diversity. I think most people would not disagree with any of these things. Okay, here's some great tools, approaches that we can use. We also have a current action program called the World Programme for Human Rights Education. It's really fantastic. This is the 5th phase, so it's already been running for 20 years now, maybe more. It's from 2025 till 2029, saying that human rights education for children and youth is really a basic part of the right to education. And we need to kind of expand the understanding of this so that people often think that education just means school, as if you stop learning when you're, 16 or 18 when you leave school. Human rights education is an entitlement that people have throughout their lives, part of their lifelong learning, which of course museums and libraries are such crucial institutions for. And we need to kind of focus on people who are in situations of exclusion, who are left behind, who are underserved in society. So the more that we can support human rights education for all people, the further we might well get. So just to say that when we're talking about human rights education or education for sustainable development, both of them recognize that really just knowing things is not enough. People need to know not just about problems, but about opportunities to create to contribute to their community. They need the motivation and confidence and encouragement to take part in peaceful communities. And they need to know what to do practically to contribute. So we see this very much. It's a combination of knowledge, motivation and attitude, and as well as practical skills. So I worked in museums for many years. I know from personal experience that museums can often be very knowledge heavy, but they don't always help give people the practical skills. So if we can try to rebalance that a bit, it might help our, at least the museums I worked in, it might help them to be a bit more effective. And there are lots of tools available to support us, and one of them, which is a really fantastic one, is from UNESCO, is called the Education for Sustainable Development Goals Learning Objectives. And it gives you a set of suggestions, learning objectives for knowledge, for motivation, and for practical skills for each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It's really good. It's openly available in at least 6 different languages. Just to mention another initiative that I work on with ICROM, we work on is called Our Collections Matter. So we do small training programs, we produce resources in a similar way to what the Latvian Museums and Libraries Associations have been doing with partners. And we have a big conference next week, open access, called Collections 2030 and Beyond. So it's over the 5 days of the week, and there's a day dedicated to the people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships aspects. So the peace aspect will be next Thursday. Not this Thursday, in a couple of days, but next week. But then I'd like to just give some suggestions, and these are only suggestions, for promoting peaceful, resilient communities through museums and libraries. And this was from a study trip I had to Japan in 2023. The reason I did this was because the UK, where I am based, has had little experience of dealing with conflicts of different kinds. So it's quite at risk. So Japan faces many different kinds of conflict, many different kinds of hazards, but continues to be a very thriving country. So how does it do this? So I traveled around, and then I made a kind of set of 10 recommendations. These are for UK museums and partners, but they might be relevant to you as well. So I like to think of this about Museums for Better Futures in the same way that I talked about Curating Tomorrow, is saying that, well, the future is not a set thing. We can change it, based on things that we do today when we have the chance and the opportunity. So the first one would be to say, to connect our work with sustainable development agendas and approaches really concretely. So to bring them into our organizations, the Sustainable Development Goals or human rights or environmental agreements, because we can still say that the main environmental agreements have not really been brought into the museum sector. So the Paris Agreement or the Convention for Biodiversity. If we bring them more into our work in museums, libraries, or wherever, then it helps to kind of internalize, to bring them into our ways of making decisions. The second one is that it's not enough to just support sustainable development. We have to do things. We have to take actions. That means we can't just do the same 1 year as we were doing the year before, or we'll just achieve the same thing. So we need to understand the challenges and the opportunities, see where we can make a difference, where is it worth making a difference, set a goal, plan some action, do it, and tell the story. And this is the principle of localizing the SDGs, which Inga mentioned before. So in the guide that we produced a couple of years ago from this UNESCO partnership project, it gives you a kind of timetable, a roadmap to really do it in a step-by-step way. So just to turn the ideas into practical action. And the third one is to connect global and local dimensions. So it sounds like a very corny to say, oh, we need to think globally and to act locally, but it is really true. So there's an idea that global just means local everywhere. So if we take action locally everywhere, it changes things. So it's not just about taking big ideas from outside, you know, international perspective, and kind of forcing them locally. It's also about creating opportunities for people and communities to bring their ideas and voices and concerns to the wider world. And so a really obvious way to do this is to connect with international days. There are lots of international days. Lots of people, organizations around the world would be doing things for them. Why not do more things through museums and libraries? So I just mentioned a few: World Cities Day, International Day of Friendship, International Women's Day, or World Environment Day is the bottom right one. So there are lots of these, and I'm sure some of you already take part in them. But if more of us took part, it helps us tell a collective story, not just, you know, what individual institutions did. The fourth one is to make use of the current practical action plans to support us. So I mentioned the UNESCO recommendation can seem a bit abstract, but we can use it practically to use the Education for Sustainable Development Goals learning objectives. These are great. These are really fantastic resources. They help us work together, you know, using a common framework. It helps us tell a better story. To say that restoring nature is good for people and communities as well as good for nature. So nature, our common home, can be a fantastic resource to bring communities together, even when there is quite a lot of disagreement or conflict between communities, because it helps you stay away from more difficult topics, you know, more topics that are more contested. So this can be a wonderful opportunity. I just have some examples there from Japan at the bottom. There's a really good initiative called the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. It runs till 2030. It's really good because it's really practical. It's not just talking about very depressing things like climate change and extinction. It's about, okay, let's take action, whether it's in our park, in our garden, in our local countryside, at our school. It could be in our museum or library grounds if they have any green space. So we also have to recognize that culture and heritage can be they can create problems when they are used in particular ways. So how can we use culture and heritage to bring people together or to respect diversity between people from different cultural backgrounds? So the example I have here is from a really big event in a city, in a town in England called the Durham Miners Gala. It's not just about miners, it's about working class people, working people coming together and celebrating working culture. It's fantastic because it's free. It attracts many thousands of people from different backgrounds, and people take part in singing in the streets. It's fantastic. And so to me, this is a great idea, a great example of how culture and heritage can bring people together for our common future. We can make use of museums and libraries as information centres and platforms for sustainable development activities. So I'll give you the example is again from Japan. It's a place that unfortunately was badly affected by a volcano in the past. There's a volcano in the background. And so they have an educational centre which talks about, you know, if the volcano erupts, this is what will happen. This is what happened in the past. This is what you should do. It's really practical, very, very good. We can also say that museums and libraries, they don't have to have all the answers because they don't have all the answers. They can also create opportunities for people to share their own ideas. So this is about making sure that the activities we do respect that people have their own ideas, aspirations, concerns. And so here we have an example where we just ask people questions. Museums can ask, they can ask lots of questions, and then people can answer them and find out what other people think. Is actually quite a powerful tool. This was about Museums for Climate Action. So it just asked a question like, what if museums ... how could they change to support climate action in a better way? We can also make sure that our activities really leave no one behind. We've heard this phrase a few times. So who are the communities or the groups of people who are currently underserved? Who is left out of our institutions? How can we involve them more in our cultural life? And the last one is to say that museums and libraries, so it just says museums here, museums and libraries can support long-term transformations. So whereas the newspapers might give us what's very current, it doesn't always tell us what's important. So how did we get to where we are now? What were the decision points in the past? What options do we have now? What options do we want for the future? What do we want our place to be like in 5 or 10 or 50 years' time? And what do we need to do today to build that future? So just to conclude, fostering peaceful communities, supporting peaceful communities is really a key part of sustainable development. There are lots of calls to increase education and participation to promote peaceful communities. There are lots of invitations to take part. There are plenty of tools for us to use and opportunities to take part in. Museums and libraries can make many contributions through education, awareness raising, and bringing people and communities together. And collaborations and partnerships, such as we have through these webinars, help us to learn fast and to work together. And so these are just my contact details at the end, and I'll stop the share and we can take some questions.
Thank you, Henry. Thanks a lot. And I think it was a great presentation showing how we can connect our work to big agendas, including Agenda 2030. You mentioned several international agreements, Human Rights Declaration, and many other very relevant international frameworks. To begin with, I would like to challenge you a little bit and to ask actually, why should museums do it? Because it's not a simple task. You have to educate yourself, you have to be aware of these international agreements, you have to study your local context. Museums, we know they can also, and as well as libraries, can operate in a more modest and secluded way, staying in their very concrete professional set of skills and tasks. How would you motivate museums and libraries to engage with SDGs and including peace building?
Yeah, sure. So I think the way I would say that is that whether museums and libraries do it out of, let's say, a moral responsibility, or often even a legal responsibility, or even just they can do it just to be very selfish. It just makes really good sense. So, for instance, there is less public, in many places, there is less public funding than there used to be. So in a lot of places, museums and libraries, they thought, oh, well, we'll just get public funding. It will be okay. Society trusts us. These are dangerous assumptions because as there is less money available, then museums and libraries are really at risk. So like in the UK, where I am, there's a big push to almost privatize them so that they should get more and more money from sponsorship or by competing for project funding, for not enough project funding. Like if we agree, like in our heart of hearts, that all people are free and equal in dignity and rights, that means people in different places. So why should it be that more than the fair share of money goes to the big cities? That's just unfair. That's going in the opposite direction. So if we understand some of like our government's commitments a bit better, we can share them with them and say, actually, you're not fulfilling your commitment. So if we talk about progressive realization of rights, maximum available resources as part of one of the human rights agreements, we acknowledge that the right to cultural life is not just about getting into museums and libraries, but also to say, we hear it so many times that education, lifelong learning, public awareness are really crucial for all of these things. Where do they happen? Where practically? Libraries are often in a stronger position because they have a more central kind of support in governments. Museums are a bit different because they tend to be in different setups. So if we want a future where there are museums and libraries, we need to be able to talk about the value of them. And I mean, I worked in museums for a long time, and you only really understand what they do once you work in them. So much of it is behind the scenes. And so the strength of the goal-based approach of the Sustainable Development Goals is that it helps us talk about what we do in relation to the challenges and the opportunities of the real world, not just what happens behind the scenes. So if we can say, okay, well, museums and libraries, a lot of them are working to address poverty, or they're working to address social inclusion, or they're just working to promote people's right to cultural life. These are very basic things, but they get a bit lost in the political talk about, we need money, or we need to look at the relative financial value. So I think to me, it's dangerous to talk about the value of culture and libraries and museums just in terms of how many jobs they create or how they're good for health and well-being. People have a right to cultural life in the same way that they have these other rights. The more that we can remind people or just educate people about what rights they have, I think is really strong.
Thank you, Henny. That was really, really powerful. Anchoring museums and libraries in the real world, as you said, and connecting their work with the challenges of their users. That sounds really powerful. Could be part of a mission of some library or museum. For the next question, I would like to ask Diana Walters to join us. And the question is, where do we start actually when the museum or a library has decided to work with SDGs on local level? How to find the local relevance of SDGs and especially the peace building aspect of it? How to learn the needs, these challenges of the real world that Henry just mentioned locally to make it work and for it to be meaningful locally.
That's a great question.
Yes, you would like to start. Yeah, please go on.
I'll offer my quick thoughts on that, and Henry, it would be very interesting to hear yours. It's a great question. Where do you start? It's one thing to have a sense of, yes, this is important, to understand that this is really important and potentially transformative work that can be, that both can and possibly even should be done. But where do we start? And I think that what often strikes me is the amount of knowledge, the amount of understanding and connectivity and real what I call rootedness that exists already within those institutions, within individual libraries and museums, and most importantly, within all the people that they are already working with. So to a certain extent, I think from my perspective, the first place to start is to stop talking. It's so difficult for cultural organisations, I think, because of our long history of being providers of education or facilitators of learning or activists and so on. And actually, what we need to do, in my opinion and in my experience, is to be very humble and to move very quickly into a space of, we don't know, please tell us, we're interested, we need to learn, and to do that with deep, with genuine sincerity. I think peace building is a very fragile, particularly at the moment, a it's such a fragile thing to be engaged in, and we have to recognize that this is contested, that there will be many different ideas and opinions and views and narratives and stories and histories and feelings, emotions around these subjects. So we have to get that cultural humility first and foremost. We're not the experts anymore. We need to just go into a space of listening. Active listening is one of the most powerful and transformative things anyone or any organization can ever do.
Thank you, Diane. I didn't expect that. Step one, stop talking. Henry, what would you like to add? Where to start? Where to
Yeah,
begin?
yeah. I think in a similar way to in a very similar way to what Diana says, is to accept that none of us have all of the answers, but we all have some of them. And for me, it kind of involves two things. It's like the museum looking outside the door, talking to people, finding out. And then it also involves looking inside the organization. What do we already do? Because we're already doing lots of things. How do the things that we do contribute to the world we have? What do we do that contributes in a good way? And what are we doing that we could do in a different way? And so in the same way is that the museum and library the library is not a broadcaster for us to use, or it's an instrument for us to use. It's an instrument for society to use. So what do we, how can we learn and find out, and how can we learn and be in dialogue together?
Thank you. And one more from Baiba from Salaspils Library. A specific question. We know that peace building happens in different contexts, and some countries are in peace, and some are in war, and some are post-conflict or anticipating conflict. And it's a completely different task in each of these contexts. And Baiba is asking what to do with the ethical dilemma of justice, injustice during wartime. What is the main power of museums and libraries during times of conflict? And what are our limitations? A very big question. Yeah, but I'm sure you have some thoughts and experience related to that.
Well, again, great question, Biva. Really relevant, and I think it's important to be, in my view, it's important to be very honest and realistic, and to say first off that whatever can be done, it will be both tiny but potentially, again, it could be huge, because it's the small steps, I feel, that are the ones where we can ground seeds of hope. I mean, there's many layers to your question. This kind of, it would be interesting to know a little more. Perhaps we can explore this in future webinars about what these ethical dilemmas are and what they mean. But I think it's because I think they will be very specific, contextually very specific. So I think the first thing to do is to recognize that they are there. And again, it's that sense of the honesty. If you're going to genuinely engage in anything that is going to be around peace or peaceful coexistence, or respecting your neighbour, or whatever term feels more comfortable, because peace in itself is very challenging. It's a very challenging word, particularly in the current context of the world at the moment. But recognizing that whatever it is, there are different models and understanding of what it looks like. So justice for me will look very different than justice for somebody else. And we see this playing out daily. So in a sense, I think the first thing, I would say, the first principle of ethical and social justice practice is to create containers. And we talk all the time about safe spaces and so on and so on. They're hard. In times of conflict, they are hard to build. And there is a whole set of skills and a whole set of understanding about how to create a container. And we've had fantastic work done across the years from people in conflict situations, Northern Ireland, South Africa. I mean, you know, so many places where this has been demonstrated, where these approaches have worked in practice. So I would start with that. I would start there, because I think, even if I may, even sort of like in your question, there is potentially, somebody hearing that might think that there's potentially an assumption that there's right and wrong. Whereas in actual fact, when we're talking about things like justice, it's so nuanced. It's never dualistic. So the only way to start is to create that safe container and that safe space, which libraries and museums are absolutely set up to do, theoretically, even if not practically.
Thank you, Diana. And luckily, we have 3 more webinars, and we will be exploring some of those approaches and also learning some of those case studies, the success stories that you mentioned. Henry, would you like to add something?
Yeah, sure. For me, as Diana said, I think there is no single answer. It's very dependent on the context, the individual and the group you have in front of you. You know, it's really hard to generalize. But for me, a general principle would be, well, what is it that people and communities want and need? So rather than us assuming this is what they want or need, but certainly to make sure that in what we are doing is a positive or constructive experience for them, so that we don't traumatize people. You know, and it's impossible to give a single answer, because it depends on the context, because what people will want or need is really different. So sorry to kind of dodge I feel like I'm dodging the question, but I think I'd rather answer it that way and say, this is what you should do, because I don't have the answer. So, but I look forward to exploring it in more detail in future webinars as well.
Thank you. And it's really time to stop talking. And we're looking forward to meeting you in the next webinar on 30th September. And we will be really continuing exploring this sensitive and multidimensional topic of peace building through museums and libraries. And the topic of the next webinar will be peace, justice, and strong institutions, working with the SDG 16. So please join us on 13th September and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.